always say I didn't move to Japan, I just moved to my village. And that really is the truth. The thing that's really interesting is Japan has somewhat commercialized foraging. I think as humans, our brains are so busy that we have to filter things out. And it sounds cheesy, but I believe it's a mindset of actually taking the time to notice things. Everything kind of changed in that moment where I was like, I want to live next to that lady and I want her to be my grandma.
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and we're sitting in the studio with Emily today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
You're a documentary filmmaker and forager who moved a few years ago to Nara, and you're part of the Rural Revitalization Corps. It's a difficult word to pronounce in English, but we got there, and maybe you can explain that a little bit more later. But thank you for coming. We're going to talk about your journey to Japan and maybe start at the beginning with what brought you here. Why did you move to Japan?
Well, I never thought I was going to move to Japan. My mum is from Japan, but growing up, I didn't speak Japanese. And I came to Japan probably 4 or 5 times as a child and had just a real mixed experience. At one point, I felt very disorientated when I was here, mainly because I didn't speak the language. And I think that there was no attempt for me to really speak the language. But then also it was a time where my mum was really generous and used to buy me things in Japan. So it was fun, but also very confusing. And I didn't think I would ever want to live here. I just didn't have that kind of urge. But 2 years ago, I downloaded Duolingo. So it's more like 2.5 years ago. And I was interested in starting to learn Japanese, really not for any reason besides just wanting to speak a little bit anyway. And after I'd built up a bit of a streak, I said to my partner, who loves Japan, actually, it's one of the first things he said to me is, I want to move to Japan. And so he's British without a Japanese kind of background. And so I found that very surprising. But I'm kind of used to this new glamorization of Japan in the past kind of 5 years. I've seen that change, or 5 to 10 years. Yeah. And so I'm always a tiny bit skeptical of that. But anyway, I really wanted to take some time off. And I think deep down, I did want to kind of look into my heritage, but I didn't think about that at the time. And so I said, I really want to travel Japan for 3 months, ended up being more like 4 months, mainly because I hadn't taken any time off. Mm-hmm. And I worked since I was 13, and I worked several jobs at once. And so I just wanted time. Yeah.
A good break, a good
I wanted
break.
A good break.
Yeah.
And I think that there were other factors in my life. I had spent a lot of my adult career traveling, making documentaries, mainly about very tricky topics. And I was exhausted, I think, from the emotional turmoil of being at the forefront of really painful experiences, even if they weren't mine.
So 2023, you take your break, you fly to Japan, and this time not as a child following your parents and your mother who was Japanese, but from your own desire to come and kind of reconnect and re-experiences. How was that trip for you to kind of come back 2023?
It was the first time I'd been to Japan without my mum. And it was a completely different experience. So I had planned the whole trip. My partner hadn't really helped all that much, which had annoyed me at the beginning. But then actually I realized it was a great thing. And I felt really drawn to the countryside. And by this point, I was already a forager. And I didn't know anything really about the Japanese culture of foraging or seasonality, really. And as soon as I got to Japan, with my very limited Japanese, I started trying to do some more research into Japanese foraging. And that's when I came across sansai, which are mountain vegetables. So that basically just means anything kind of foraged, but it normally has a more kind of leafy connotation.
Okay.
And I felt very drawn to the countryside, and it was just a really uplifting experience for me. One, being able to speak a tiny bit of Japanese was a big weight off me. I think I couldn't even speak to my mum's family. And when I met up with my family for the first time, I was able to speak to them. They don't speak any English. And that was very healing for me. And then when we were traveling around, just the ability to meet all the Oba-san and Oji-san and actually form a really strong connection pretty early on, because they could see my passion for foraging. And they were very surprised about my knowledge, which really opened up the doors to some amazing connections made very spontaneously along the way.
So when you came back, you did kind of go directly to reconnect a little bit with your family here. Which area are they from?
So earlier you said my mum's Japanese. This is a very complex thing, and I don't think that I'm going to dedicate too much time to it. But I grew up saying I was half Japanese, but I found out shortly after my trip, so maybe the 4th month, I found out the reality of me saying that was not considered appropriate in Japan. So my mum is Zainichi, which means that her parents were Koreans that came over to Japan. She grew up speaking Japanese, but in Japan, she is not considered Japanese. And so I hadn't processed any of that before, but it's something that I've had to kind of process since coming to Japan. And it's been an interesting, not change in my identity, but another layer of complication when I was already feeling quite complicated. But all my mum's living relatives, they all live either in Saitama or Tokyo area.
Okay.
So, and both of her siblings that are still alive married a Japanese and have children
Here in Japan.
Here in Japan.
So learning a little bit of Japanese, starting with the app and kind of getting to a point where you could communicate with everyone was a good way for you to reconnect. And the way you did that was directly by researching about foraging. Sansai is a Japanese term for these mountain vegetables that you can forage here. But for someone who's maybe not familiar with foraging, can you explain a little bit what this is and what it entails?
So foraging is the act of going into the wild or a place where things are growing that haven't been cultivated or necessarily planted, and then picking them. So this can be plants, it can be nuts, it can be roots and berries, and it can be mushrooms. And it's something that all of our common ancestors did, and something that is very important in many cultures, especially indigenous cultures, and it continues to be very significant in Japanese culture today. So when I moved, I felt a real deep connection, which was very affirming for me.
Foraging, the way it's being practiced now in the West, and you said you were a forager before coming, is it the same as the way it's done here in Japan?
The history of foraging in Japan is somewhat changing. I think since the end of World War II, with the rapid urbanization of Japan, many people now live in cities, and that means they're not heading out into the mountains to pick wild vegetables anymore, although their grandparents and those who are still alive are. The thing that's really interesting is Japan has somewhat commercialized foraging. So you can go into supermarkets and you can buy many of these ingredients now in springtime. The thing that's very unique, I think, about the Japanese is their deep love of seasonal motifs, which have been celebrated in poetry since the first poetry anthology talks all about foraging mushrooms and picking wild herbs. The manyoshu. There's such a deep, strong history, and that is very prevalent still. But things have changed since then.
So with this kind of change, and people nowadays, especially those that are living or growing up in the modern cities, not being too connected with it, what was it like when you kind of went to see your family and you said you're a forager, you like foraging, and you kind of brought up that topic with them? Is this something they could relate to? Was this something that like, oh, this is interesting, or she's into this? This is something I haven't heard for a while.
I think that my family now are pretty urban. And so I think that they aren't necessarily people that are out picking vegetables, but everyone in Japan, especially the really famous sansai, everyone in Japan has a deep love of these, which has been ingrained in them. So it's a kind of a universal joy to speak about it with Japanese people, especially if you know more than they do, because they're very interested. And often their relationship is, oh, my grandmother spoke about this, or my grandfather picked this. But I think it was the same with my family. They don't have that physical act of going out and picking things that their grandparents would have, or their parents.
So you came 2023, you reconnect with your family, you start looking into foraging in Japan, but that was just supposed to be a 3-month trip. Now you're living here.
Yeah.
What was the moment that kind of made you decide, like, no, it can't just be 3 months. I want to come back. Or I want to stay.
I think deep down inside me, there had been a change, a brewing for a couple of years before then. I wanted to make some kind of change, but I hadn't said, oh, I want to move abroad. And I definitely wasn't like, I want to move to Japan. But when I was traveling around, I felt a deep connection, which was very lovely to feel. But still, I hadn't said to my partner, oh, let's move to Japan. I don't even, thinking back to then, I don't even know how it would have worked. Because of my mum not actually being technically Japanese, I don't have any rights to live here, so I'd have to get a visa and everything. And we were just traveling around, and then we happened to go to this village called Higashi Yoshino, which I was drawn to because it had 3 rivers running through it. But really, unlike the rest of the trip, which I had done so much research, organized so many things, kind of overpacked our schedule a little bit, this was the only part of the trip where we had agreed to just take it easy. My partner was exhausted from being dragged around because I'm a big hiker. So taken out hiking every day, and then to this place and to go eat this delicacy and then on to the next. And so secretly I was really relieved when he was like, can't we just stay in one place and just cook? And I said, okay, well, there's got to be a river. I definitely want to swim in the river, and then I want to forage. And so we just looked on the internet, found an Airbnb, and that was that. But when we arrived in the village, something really strange happened to both of us, where we just felt very drawn. And it's not an exaggeration to say within about half an hour, we had said, shall we move here? Which was just crazy, really.
What was it that made you want to stay or come back to Higashi Yoshino, which is in Nara Prefecture for those that are not familiar?
I just felt a real connection, and it's hard to put it into words because I do think taking away all my sentimentality and romanticism, I think when you make a decision, there's always things in the background, and there's what's happened to you and your own experience, which informs that, of course. But we loved the place, and in our short time there, we made really strong friendships. And yeah, we just thought, F it, let's do it. You only live once.
So you both, I imagine, still had maybe jobs waiting or jobs lined up going back to the UK after your trip, which was just supposed to be a break. Suddenly you need to put this back on hold. Did you have a plan for like how to move there or how to make this happen to come back to Higashi Yoshino?
Well, the thing is, I was freelance, so I hadn't taken a job. And then my partner had just sold his company. So we were able to have a bit more kind of flexibility. But whilst we were there, we had already made really good friends in the village, and our friends in the village had already kind of seduced us with the plan of how it was going to all work. And we have this joke. So one of our good friends in the village is an amazing artist who is American, but he's been coming to and from the village for a decade. And we say that he basically honey trapped us into moving there to be his best friend, which is kind of how it's worked out. But he was really helpful. And we also made amazing friends with the people we were staying with. And they acted as our mentors, almost like patrons, to help us, especially at the early stage and with all of the paperwork. And that's when the Chikyo Koshi Kyorokutai scheme first reared its head, and it was decided that that would be the best thing for me to do.
So that's the Rural Revitalization Corps program from the government to kind of help people move to the countryside and attract more people to move.
Yes, so the Rural Revitalization Program was set up to encourage people to move from the cities to the villages where, as is very widely reported, most of the population is aging and there's a huge gap, lots of empty houses and a lack of easy access to jobs. And so that really was an amazing opportunity for me. I'm someone that's always had a passion for community, and I love to feel like I'm helping in some way. That's something that's very important to me. So having that opportunity was just the perfect thing, because I didn't want to, I personally didn't want to change too much, not sell out, but as I became more, as I started showcasing more of my foraging, there were more opportunities to be more of a content creator and be more of an influencer. And those are very valid, amazing jobs. But for me personally, I come from a documentary background. I'm a storyteller, and I don't want to necessarily sell foraging in a way that I don't personally feel suits my ethics. So it was the perfect thing.
Most people that move to Japan move to cities. You move to kind of a smaller rural community. And as you said, there's like a age difference. Population is aging there. Very few younger people. What was the experience like? Not just traveling there, but actually moving and settling as part and becoming a member of that community.
I always say that I didn't move to Japan. I just moved to my village. And that really is the truth. I hope that I will stay there for a very long time. In my village, there are many people over the age of 80. And for me, I've always had a thirst for meeting people of the older generation. I think I lost my mum's parents before I was born, my dad's parents when I was very young. So I almost have always been obsessed with grandparents. It's like a joke with all of my friends that I'm kind of thirsty for grandparental love. But the community in my village is just so strong. And I didn't even know how well we would fit in. Having grown up without the Japanese language, but actually with a deep kind of understanding of Japanese-ness, which is very strange, I understand things in Japan take time. I understand about not rocking the boat. And I was really anticipating it taking time and a lot to build that trust. But I've got this amazing example of just how wonderful my village is and my local tiny community. But so we had found a house which the Soncho, which is the mayor, had told us that it was available. That wasn't actually for sale. And we had gone with the government to look around it. And then we went back, kind of a grey area as to whether we should have gone back. We didn't break in, but we weren't doing anything wrong, but I felt uncomfortable anyway. It was kind of like 5 p.m. I was like, kind of not really like fully poking around, but I'm very Japanese in always wanting to do the right thing. So I was a bit like, I don't think we should be here. And then it was fine. But anyway, we were kind of like looking at the house from the road, and I saw an old lady who clearly lived at the house next to us. There's only 2 houses before it's just the mountains. It's a very isolated area. And I was like, oh my gosh. I said to my partner, oh my gosh, there's a lady there, we're going to get told off. And she came over, and so I kind of greeted her. And back then, my Japanese was still pretty poor, but I could speak some things. And I was trying to say to her, oh, we're looking at this house. And then all I could speak about back then really was my love of picking sansai, and I know all the names of them. And so what I was doing at the time was just saying, I love wild vegetables, I love mushrooms, and then saying the ones that I loved, which is quite random, but I mean, that's what I could say and people could feel my passion. Anyway, the old lady, when I was able to kind of tell her that we were thinking about moving there, she just embraced me, and she had true joy in her whole presence. And so that even though we couldn't speak, everything kind of changed in that moment, where I was like, this is just so trusting and so kind. And I have always been that kind of person where I feel like I'm a good judge of character, and I do put a lot of trust in these spontaneous connections.
Mm-hmm.
But that really, really sealed the deal, where I was like, I want to live next to that lady, and I want her to be my grandma. And she is now. She calls me her granddaughter.
So this warm little lady is now your neighbor in the mountains of Nara. And again, a connection through your passion for foraging. So I think it's time we dive a little bit deeper into that topic. And I asked you before if it's still common, and maybe less than it used to be. But what can you forage here in Japan, or maybe specifically in the mountains where you live?
So in springtime, it's on everyone's mind, really, foraging or foraged vegetables, sansai. But as I said, most people have that through a restaurant, or maybe buying it at a supermarket, or maybe going into the countryside and having special sansai tempura. But in the villages, people like grandma, my next door neighbor, still go out and pick. She's 93.
Wow.
So we go out together. She's on her moped, I'm on my e-bike, and we go to a really steep hill, but there grows really big warabi. So warabi is just bracken. It's one of the most widespread plants across the world. Mm-hmm. You can find it everywhere. But she knows of that spot there where it grows extra long. And so we'll go and spend the morning picking. And it's a very funny sight because she's so militant. She'll be like pointing her stick and getting me to pick those there. And
so she's commanding you around the mountains.
Yes, but she's also incredibly genki. She's fit as a fiddle. She's 93 and she still runs a huge farm. She's up at the crack of dawn. She really is a key example of how living more closely to nature can really keep you healthy for a really long time.
You mentioned bracken is the most popular, but mushrooms, I imagine, are also very, very in demand.
Yeah, there's other things beside warabi which are popular when it comes to the sansai. There's taranome, which is the tips of the angelica. There's fukinoto, which is actually the first to come out, and so there's a really beautiful image of the snow and then just the fukinoto, which is butterbur, growing through the snow as the first sign of spring. But when it comes to mushrooms, in Japan, they love mushrooms, but there is one mushroom that they love more than anything, and that's the matsutake.
Oh, yes.
Have you heard about the obsession with matsutake?
I haven't heard about the obsession, but I do know that they like it, and it's very popular and used in many, many dishes.
It's really surprising how much they love it. It's become one of the seasonal kigo, like the seasonal words that Japanese love to express a feeling to do with a season. And the smell of autumn really is matsutake.
What is it about matsutake that's so special, and why people are so obsessed with it?
It's a real cultural thing. So it goes back to the beginning of Japanese society, where they, even in the earliest poetry that we have that is surviving, they're talking about going out and picking matsutake. And so it's deeply interwoven with their love of seasonality, which it's a really complex thing that I can talk about for ages, and it's so interesting. But it really had a revival, I think, in the past 60 years. And that's where the obsession of matsutake has really kind of catapulted. And they can sell for a lot of money. A lot.
Now, this is something, maybe not so much with foraged produce, but some fruits in Japan end up selling for a lot. I can imagine some rare mushrooms hand-picked in the mountains can go for the same.
Yes, it's the same kind of gift-giving culture which has led to the inflated prices of the matsutake. I personally don't like that at all. But if you go to a place like my village, people will ask you all through autumn, especially as they know that I like mushrooms, oh, have you found a matsutake? Have you found a matsutake? And there, matsutake will be given, like I got one from my neighbor. We're not looking to sell it for thousands of pounds.
You just enjoy it for dinner. And share it with friends or family.
Yes, but the mountains near my house are incredibly dangerous. They're very steep. And so going into the mountains with grandma, my next door neighbor, my 93-year-old neighbor, it's so crazy that she can still do that.
So you drive to that spot, she on her moped and you on your e-bike?
Oh no, that's just for the one place for the warabi. So for the matsutake, we climb the mountains near our house, but there aren't really paths.
So can you forage everywhere, or are there regulations around where you can go and where it's not allowed to pick?
So when it comes to, there are regulations in Japan. For example, when I first started as my regional revitalization
I'm glad I'm not
volunteer.
the only one who struggles with this word.
It's like a tongue twister. There was a big meeting of all the heads in my village to give me permission to forage, specifically like along the riverside. And really, you kind of need the landowner's permission to pick in the forests. That's not to say that there isn't a kind of grey area, which I think there is. So plenty of oji-san and aba-san pick from places that they've been picking for decades, if not centuries. So I think that if you're not sure, you should definitely find out who owns the land if you can. But there will be plenty of examples of people picking and everyone knows they're doing it.
Because I know, for example, in Nordic countries like Sweden and such, if I'm not mistaken, you're allowed to kind of go on these lands, even if they're privately owned, and pick as long as it's, a reasonable amount just for your consumption and you're not kind of like harvesting for resale. But if you don't know where you're walking in Japan and who this land belongs to, it's kind of difficult to tell, can I take this mushroom or can I not take this mushroom? It's
very hard in Japan because also there can be a forest which has many different owners. In the UK, you are allowed to forage on public land, but you're not allowed to dig. So if you want to take a route, you're supposed to ask for the landowner's permission.
So you can pick berries, but you can't pull out something.
Yeah, exactly. You can basically pick everything apart from digging for the root.
Interesting. So in your case, it's a bit special because you're there to promote the area as well and to work with the locals to attract more people. So you get to forage in those lands. And by now, I imagine you kind of know which land belongs to whom.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that also where I live, most of the forest is pretty inaccessible. We live in a huge cedar and cypress jungle, really. And many of those forests are no longer properly managed. So there aren't people going there all the time.
You mentioned spring is a season where everyone kind of talks about sansai a lot, mushrooms more in fall. And on your social media page on Instagram, you're currently doing a series kind of going through the 72 seasons of Japan, which is based to the little research I did on the historical calendar I used, where every season is 5 days or something like that.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
This project has been a mammoth project, but it's one of the best things I've done. So the 72 microseasons were part of the old calendar, which the Japanese followed before they adapted to the Gregorian calendar. So that was around 1863, around then when they during the Meiji, they changed to the Western Gregorian calendar. But before then, they were using this calendar with its 24 seasonal markers, which are the solar terms, and then each year divided into 72 microseasons, which means they're 5 or 6 days. Some are 6. But it's just a remarkable way of seeing the world. And I didn't know when I embarked on the project how many new things I was going to see because of this project.
So I watched a few of your videos, and listening to it, it's very poetic.
Thank you.
And you are showcasing small changes in nature that you observe, that you perceive. For me, not necessarily paying attention to this calendar, right now, August and July are just hot every single day. I don't see much change, right? I'm just waiting for fall to come. But what is it like when you're out there in the mountains of Nara and actually paying attention? How do you notice these kind of small changes? Where do you go and look for them?
I always say to people that you can see small changes wherever you are. So I've done something very extreme in moving to the countryside of Japan and living in the mountains. But before I was living where I am, I was living in London, and I was foraging and living a good life connected to nature there. And so what I always try and tell people is you can access it much easier if you're in the countryside or if you head out to the countryside. But really, I do believe, and it sounds cheesy, but I believe it's a mindset of actually taking the time to notice things. I think as humans, our brains are so busy that we have to filter things out. But what I try and encourage people to do is tune into the things that are actually worth noticing. And maybe you can filter out a bit of your phone or whatever it is. You can't do everything, but I think when you start noticing, you see more. And it's a phenomenon that happens to everyone. Once you start tuning in, you see it everywhere.
How does this affect foraging?
I think that foraging really is a mindset of returning to a place that we all should really be at. It's seeing our place within nature, but also thinking about where things are coming from. Where is our food coming from? I think that foraging isn't just about the simple act of picking free wild food, but it's kind of revolutionary. It's a way of finding a place that society really has forgotten. And I think it's very good for all of us to remember what our history is and where we came from. I think that there is too much emphasis put on convenience. For example, I had a really lovely guest come to my house, and they said, this was just about a week ago, they said, "Oh, it's so amazing here, it's so beautiful. I can see how much you and your partner love it here. You're thriving. But isn't it inconvenient living here?" And that really changed my way of thinking, because I thought so much emphasis is put on convenience. For example, in London, people getting their groceries on motorbikes. And that takes so much joy, I think, out of even the act of going to a supermarket. It's not necessarily about going out into the woods and picking things, which is really gives you a really good high, by the way. It's not like that, but it's really wonderful. But the act of picking up a tomato and selecting things in a mindful way is really wonderful. And I think the pursuit of convenience is doing bad things for us.
So paying attention, making time to notice those 72 changes in the year, and going out there in nature, foraging for food is going back to our roots in a way for you. What are the things that you enjoy foraging for the most?
And I think the 72 microseasons is just a lens of encouraging it. I don't think you have to get too kind of you don't have to get too obsessed with the actual microseasons. It's more about encouraging the art of noticing, the true facts of slowing down. When it comes to foraging, I get very excited about certain things that I foraged before, but really it's about what's around now. And there is always something delicious and edible pretty much everywhere, at all times.
Whatever you pick, you take home and you kind of cook your own recipes with. Is this something you kind of learned along the way to kind of, oh, now I have these mushrooms that I just picked from the forest. Let me figure out what I can do with them. Or do you kind of research recipes first and then go out and see if you can find what you need for it?
It's a mixture of things. There will be certain ingredients that I will have been obsessed with, especially if they're not easy to find or they don't grow in my kind of area. There'll be things that I'm always thinking about, but there will also just be the things that I just pick and then just cook. I love experimenting, and that's one of the things that was very exciting about starting to forage, because I suddenly had access to crazy ingredients with the ability to create things that no one had created before. And for someone that loves food, you have so many new flavors. It's very exciting.
When you mentioned that you like kind of foraging for things you found before. So I imagine when you do it for your first year, everything is new. When the second year comes around and you've kind of experienced those seasons, you know, oh, soon this is going to come out, and you can start looking out for it and see the small, I don't know, bamboo sprouts coming out of the ground. Does this change how you approach a new season of foraging after you've done it a couple of times?
I think the thing about foraging is some things have such a narrow window, and so it's impossible to do everything every year. So much of what we do is preserving for the future. I can never get everything that I want. You have to just be realistic. It takes so much walking, but then there's something that I have nicknamed foraging admin, and that's the act of picking whatever it is off the stems or cleaning mushrooms. Lots of mushrooms that you forage are so difficult to clean. The foraging admin can take hours and hours and hours, and that's the thing that I find the least enjoyable of the whole part, because I like the eating, I like the finding, and I like the cooking, but I don't like the cleaning. But it's all part of it, and you have to try and find a way to access your mindfulness when you've got a lot of different jobs to do. But it's impossible to do everything.
One of the important part of foraging is you need to identify things rightfully, right? You need to go out and, oh, this is a bamboo shoot or this is a matsutake. Are there risks in Japan for misidentification? And either it could be picking something that is forbidden to pick because there's few left, or potentially dangerous, maybe some toxic mushrooms.
Across the world, there are poisonous plant and mushroom species. And so you can never eat anything that you haven't properly identified. That's the first thing that I teach people. There's a lot of connotations that mushrooms are more poisonous than plants, but that's actually not true. Plants are incredibly poisonous too. And actually, when it comes to just contact, there are plants that you can come into contact with and get very sick.
Here in Japan?
Across the world. And so when you're learning to forage, I think the first thing is to kind of, you have to be very humble, and you have to approach it very kind of slowly, but it's very doable. I'm completely self-taught. There are so many resources now with the internet and with books. And so I just try and tell people that you've got to be very careful, but you shouldn't be scared, because this is all knowledge that our ancestors actually collected for us. And it really should be available to everyone.
There are some that are like pretty obvious to identify. Some, they may have like a lookalike where one is fine, the other one is not. Do you have any couple of examples of things to pay attention to here in Japan?
Definitely. So there's a very commonly eaten sansai, but it also kind of crosses over just to regular vegetable herb, seri. Mm-hmm. Have you had seri?
Yes.
It looks like a parsley, so it's often called kind of water parsley, or the English name really is water dropwort, which is very confusing because the most deadly plant in the UK is called water dropwort too. In Japan too, this plant exists, it's basically a water hemlock, and these two plants look really, really very, very similar to the untrained eye. So much so that we've got seri and we've got doku seri, which is the deadly poisonous one. Doku means poisonous in Japanese. And so they've even given it that name. that is a really kind of frequently eaten plant that people could see and think, oh, it's seti, and pick it and eat the wrong one. So there's certain families that are very easily confused. And I mean, these same plant families grow across the world, but one is the kind of carrot family. Carrot family. So anything that looks like a carrot or parsley. There are many amazing edibles, but there are also some very deadly doppelgangers. And so when I'm teaching people, I always say those are advanced plants. It's best to leave those until you're very confident. But there are ways of telling them apart. And you have to pay attention to lots of different things. But if it's later on in the year, if you dug up the dokuseri, it would have a very large taproot, almost like a parsnip. That is incredibly deadly. People often think it's like a wild carrot or parsley. But then if you picked two of them, you could say, oh, this one's got little roots. This is good. This one has got a giant deadly carrot on it. Not good. But there are different ways of telling things, but it's best to stick to the simple.
So this is a more advanced plant that requires a more trained eye for correct identification. What are some of the easy things that anyone could start with if tomorrow they want to go to the mountain and pick something that they can use for cooking at home?
This is one of my great passions, really, is the starter plants. And this is applicable to people in Japan, but also applicable to people in Europe and the UK. I hate how I have to say that. And America. But there are plants that grow across the world, and we have labeled them as weeds most of the time. So that's your dandelions, that's your chickweed. These are incredibly nutritious, really, really, really good for you, full of vitamins and other things, and they grow everywhere. And most people can identify a dandelion. And the number of different things you can just do with that one plant. You can make a substitute honey. It's not really honey, but you make a syrup and then you put the flowers in it and then it tastes like honey. So it's kind of like a vegan honey, even though it's not honey. You can make coffee from the roots, which does pretty much taste like coffee. It was used during World War II when there was no coffee.
Really?
Yeah, you can use the leaves. You can use them in lieu of spinach. So there's probably 50 different plants that I use instead of spinach. Dandelion being one of them. So you can saute them. It's really, really, really a very diverse plant. And you have that with many, many, many different plants that grow all over. And my other beginner plant family is the allium family. So that's your onions and garlic family. And everyone knows wild garlic or ramps or ramsons. If you smell garlic in the air in the woods, you've probably found a patch. And if you pick a leaf and it smells like garlic, that is a positive identifier for that family. And all members of that family are edible. So even if you can't identify what it is, maybe it's a wild chive or nobiru, which is the Japanese. If it smells like garlic, you can take that home and eat it. And I think it's about building the confidence. Once you're in the field picking those things, I think it leads people to be more interested. So afterwards, you could be like, okay, well, I want to know what that was that I ate. But that is merely the exception, because in other instances, unless you know the specific species, you probably shouldn't eat it. But the garlic family is great.
You forage all of this in the mountains of Nara. Is there a big difference in what you can find when you're in the mountains or when you're closer to the coast, or if you, I don't know, go more like inwards towards the Japanese Alps? Do the mushrooms, the plants, the vegetation change a lot?
So I haven't had the privilege really of spending that much time by the coast in Japan. In the UK, I would go towards the estuary to do estuary foraging and seaweed foraging. So it's going to be the same in Japan. I just haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. But I know there's a rich culture of seaweed foraging, and any place where there's a slightly different kind of landscape, there will be different plants growing. So I'm very excited about going towards the sea, because when you're foraging in a kind of estuary type area, the plants taste salty and delicious. It's a very different flavor. They actually take the flavor of the sea. So that's something I'm excited to explore.
How often do you go out to forage per week? Like, is it like a daily activity where every morning you go out in the mountains and have a look a little bit, or is it more like once a week? Or
I don't really ever think of it so much as going out foraging. I just wake up and the first thing I do is go out into the woods and I bring my camera, and then if I see something, I pick it. And so it's very integrated into my life. It's a daily thing, but with my current project, I'm very busy with filming. So I haven't had as much chance to do more of the complicated recipes that I would normally do. I'm more just kind of like throwing the things into the stir fry. Whereas normally I'm always trying to challenge myself to create new recipes that haven't been made before. But I've had to take a little back seat on that, or I filmed them and haven't been able to edit them yet, because sometimes I'm like, okay, I've got to do this. But yeah, I haven't had as much time to kind of show people what I've been doing. But it doesn't stop.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, the 72 seasons keep going and keep passing. I imagine if you're out up early, you also see a lot of interesting wildlife in the forest.
I saw the cutest badger. I actually managed to get a video of it. I was so excited. It was in the daytime. Very adorable. But one thing that my 72 microseasons project has really done for me is open my eyes to even more facets of nature. So I think that I was very kind of connected to nature in some ways, but I think it was more through the foraging lens and then through the plants and trees. But I have now come into contact with lots of insects and birds, which I would always say that I was like vaguely interested in. But now, because I'm spending time observing and filming them and seeing all the changes, the different songs change, the bird songs changing and the different insect voices changing, it's really made me so much closer to nature and so much more interested in the very small facets, which would have otherwise passed me by. So I can't believe it, but I'm an insect bug collector now.
Wow. So you moved to that little community, you found your grandmother there, and you've been foraging since and part of the revitalization program. How has foraging kind of contributed to your community or to your integration in the community? This, I imagine it surprised a lot of people at first, foreigners moving there and then going out in the forest, going for wild mushrooms and plants and much more. How has this kind of contributed to your integration?
I think it's so interesting because there are some contradictions, which I experience all the time. But so people in the countryside are so wonderfully connected to nature, and nearly everyone, especially people that have land, are growing their own vegetables and are very fit and connected through that. But it's very interesting, and it's the same in the UK, but people have an idea of what is a good like plant or a sansai. And then there's weeds. So that's things like dandelion and the other plants that I mentioned before. And one thing that I found really interesting is, this is within my community, people still have a tendency to kind of demonize these other weeds. They love cutting them or pulling them up and having very kind of manicured kind of gardens and hatakes where you grow vegetables. So one of the things that I think that I'm contributing within my community is trying to raise a little bit awareness around the benefits of biodiversity. And when it comes to mushrooms, there are lots of people in my village that didn't have any idea about the diversity of mushrooms that grow there. So I did this big exhibition in November, and I created a moss garden where I put real specimens of mushrooms that I spent hours climbing in the mountains and nearly died on several occasions. That's how dangerous it is. Falling like 30 meters. It's very, very scary. But then I also picked different species and identified them, and then provided a microscope and what do you call those? Magnifying glass. And I also created a little zine.
So then you kind of display this at the community center, and people are like, oh, these are all mushrooms that grow in our mountains. Just
pretty much, yeah, that's what happened. I had so many people come, hundreds and hundreds of people, mainly from within the village to begin with, but also from further afield. And people were just really amazed. And many people who had lived there for 80 years had said how they had no idea about the number of mushrooms and the diversity and all the different colors. And so I love the fact that I can bring some of my passion to people, but also it's a two-way street, and I'm constantly learning from my elder friends, like Umemoto-san, who I call grandma. She taught me an old method which is used really just in my village and one other village, which is the neighboring village, but they wrap mochi in the honoki leaves. So that's the type of big-leaved magnolia, and they wrap them all up. And this is an old way of preserving
cool.
and keeping them fresh. But this really is like an old method, and people don't use it anymore. So I felt very honored to have been taught that from her, which she makes them every year. So we've made them together twice now. And just the ability to kind of try and preserve some of that knowledge, which is very localized, is one of my missions and also a huge privilege.
So you're kind of doing this also part of this revitalization program. You're documenting your journey there. You're sharing your passion. You're bringing people on like small foraging kind of classes, tours. This project that you're doing, 72 Seasons, is also kind of also in the second half coming to an end. What are your next plans as part of this program? What are the other things you're working on that you want to try to implement or contribute or develop in this community?
I think I want to continue doing what I'm doing. So I spend a lot of time with my elder friends, just learning from them. I have over 10 very, very close friends that I spend time with on a daily basis. And so I want to learn more about their lives. I want to learn more about what the village was like before. And I have a project, which I think I'm going to start next year, but I have a friend who is completely extraordinary. She's 86 and she is a weaver. She weaves kimono from silk.
Wow.
And she dyes the materials using plants and mushrooms, which is something that I'm very interested and passionate about. And so I'm hoping to work with her and document some of her craft, because it really is extraordinary. It's she is a true artisan, despite being very humble, almost like an outsider artist. But I want to showcase her work and, you know, put it on film for posterity.
Japan has an aging population. It's very visible, especially in the countryside. But listening to you talk, it feels like there are so many stories, so many things we can learn from them. But when we go about our daily lives, we don't always notice the elderly. They are kind of living their lives, maybe staying at home more due to lack of mobility. But in your experience, what are the steps we can take to kind of engage more with, which is soon to be a majority of the Japanese population, to kind of preserve that knowledge, to still kind of connect with them?
I think it all comes down to connection. So that's something that I've sought my whole life. So it comes very easily to me. But I think taking the time to kind of walk around is really important. So, I mean, I take things to the next level. I used to walk from South London to North London every day to get to the edit. That was 2.5 hours, me walking at full pace there and back. So I know that I'm extreme, but I love walking. But that really is the way that I met so many people within my village. So my village is actually a very large landmass. It used to be different villages that they connected as one. But because I love walking, I would walk when people don't normally walk. And it's me and my 2 dogs. I always wear pink every day. And I just say hello to everyone. And through that, I've met so many people. You don't necessarily get that moment with someone outside their home where you can see what they're doing if you're not kind of in the moment walking. I feel like I've met so many people on buses and trains in London too, but there's something very special about seeing the house where they live. Normally they're tending to their garden. And so I can say, oh, good morning. Oh, is that sato imo you're growing? And then they will reply. And then I can say, oh, I've just moved to the village. Or this was about a year ago when I actually only moved a year ago. And the connections that you're able to make are just so wonderful. I mean, I've made so many very, very, very strong connections with people through just saying hello. And people are so kind and friendly. And I even was in a village about an hour away from my village. This was last week. And I made a friend at the shrine and he invited me to his house.
Wow.
And he then was traveling through my village for Obon. And so I invited him to my house. And so I've seen him and his wife twice in a week. And that's a complete stranger that I just met just through a connection.
So being open and being out and about is how you connect with people in rural communities. The revitalization program, I think, is a 3 year.
It's 3 years.
3 year plan. You, in my understanding, kind of have your own project that you are doing for them, so to say. Do you have any official duties or obligations, like, I don't know, reports you need to give them on what is going on and how much this is contributing to their ultimate goal of bringing more people to the community?
So you do a daily report, which I send at the end of the month, but I keep a full diary anyway, so it's not too hard. But my daily report is very funny because I spend so much time with members of the community just through my own kind of pleasure. So I think my daily report is very different to other people's, but I'll be like, oh, I baked banana bread for Mr. Kizu, then I went to his house and then we read a book together. And I mean, I just feel so lucky that this is something that I can do. The truth is I would be doing this even if it wasn't my job.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I feel like I'm very privileged because I have been able to do what I do anyway.
Do you feel like the program is working? Is it contributing to more people being interested in kind of moving out of the cities?
Definitely. I think the program is fantastic in providing opportunities for people from a creative background or people from a farming background to come into the countryside and set up their business and set up their roots. I've seen, even in my village or the next door village, the number of people that have come and stayed is amazing. And just in my own experience, myself and my partner have had maybe 100 people that we know, friends of friends, friends of friends and friends, or people that follow me on Instagram who have come to the village purely through us. So I can only say that it's doing amazing things. I do think that they could update it maybe a little bit. I think it's a bit of a corporate structure, but it's an amazing scheme and I think that they should be encouraging it more.
The people that are coming, are they equally Japanese people and foreigners, or do you notice it?
I've had many foreigners come, okay. Many.
I imagine a lot of them have questions. Oh, how can I move to the countryside? Or what is it like to really move there? Do you notice a pattern of maybe some misconceptions about life in the countryside that come up regularly?
Yeah, I think, well, most of the conversations that I've had with people haven't been specifically about living in the countryside. I think that since it's become very popular on Instagram, there are a lot of people that are attracted by the idea. Mm-hmm. And so people might ask me my opinion. Living in the countryside is very different to living in a city. And I don't have any real opinion on living in the city because I'm not very well informed in that respect. But I do think there has to be a type of care taken when you're advertising things like empty houses. Oh, it's 1 yen to buy this or that. I think that it is very possible for people to move to a community and have an amazing time, but it can also go the other way. Mm. And I think that when you're moving into a community, it's very important to look at not just what you're getting, what are you giving back? How are you enriching the place where you're moving? I don't think that you're going to thrive unless you're doing that. And I mean, for me, I love my community. I'm in the chorus which I joined not speaking Japanese, which was a real challenge, but it's amazing. The choir. I'm in the old people walking group where the youngest member is 77. Apart from me, I'm not 77. There's a football team, which I was playing on, but I broke my toe. But it's showing up to things. I mean, you don't have to go to everything, but I think that these communities are so tight-knit, and I think the only way that you can really thrive is by participating and giving yourself in some ways.
I like what you said about it's not only about what you can get out of moving to that community, but also what you can bring to them and contribute to. And maybe that's an aspect that is often forgotten when,
I think it is.
When dreaming of free IKEA and cheap lifestyle compared to other places. What are you actually going to bring to that community as well if you're going to be part of it?
Yeah, and I think that it's really easy to miss the fact that this isn't for everyone, and there is compromises that you have to make.
Convenience, you talked about that before.
Convenience, and also I think living in Japan isn't as easy as it can seem on social media, especially if you're not from a Japanese kind of background. You might struggle in some ways if you don't realize the reality of what you're moving into. You will never truly fit in, really. That's just undeniable. And I think that from speaking to people that have been here for longer, not close friends of mine, but just people on groups and things, some people really struggle, I think, with that identity, or not speaking Japanese, or not fitting into the community, especially in the countryside. It's very easy to not be accepted and feel unaccepted, which can be very difficult for people.
Do you feel like you found what you were looking for in Higashi Yoshino?
I can't believe my luck, really. I feel so privileged and lucky and grateful and happy. I think that, not to get too deep, but many years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I was very high coping mechanism, so successful and did very well at school and university, but deep down I wasn't very happy. But since I reconnected with nature and taught myself to forage and then ended up in Higashi Yoshino, I just can't even believe it. I just feel so happy to be in a community, to have a grandma, and it's really wonderful. It does feel great. That's not to say there aren't difficult times, and I don't want it to be falsely represented that Japan is a utopia. I think that is a very damaging narrative. There are problems in Japan, and they need to be talked about. But for me, I'm living a slightly outside of the norm life. So I'm not having to deal with sexism in the workplace, or crazy long hours, or the other things that people might experience in a more traditional setting. So, but I feel very lucky.
Emily, thank you so much for coming and sharing your luck with us and sharing your story and life in your community. Do you feel like we covered the topic pretty well, or do you feel like there's some aspect of your work or what you're doing or foraging that we didn't get into that you would have liked to share?
Yeah, one thing that I always say to people, it's very important to forage sustainably. So that means not harvesting in areas where the species isn't, doing well, and also just not taking more than you need. I think that when people start foraging and become more in tune with the environment, you do naturally understand about, not being greedy. But if people aren't very aware of how plants grow, basically if you take all of the plants that are growing there, that area is decimated now, most likely. So you will have had a negative impact on that biodiversity and potentially killed off that species in that area.
So before you start picking anything everywhere, do some research on how to harvest sustainably and how to preserve the ecosystem so that you can come back next year and enjoy it again.
Yeah, it's pretty much like if there's 3 of something, leave it. And it's also about when you're foraging things like kogomi, the ostrich ferns, taking one or two off a stem rather than stripping everything. It does take some common sense, but people end up really kind of understanding that once they're more attuned to foraging. But basically, it's about being mindful and realizing that you shouldn't have a negative effect on an area. Mushrooms, there's a lot of contentious arguments as to whether it does actually affect the ecosystem because it's the fruiting body. So some people argue that if you're picking it, you're actually spreading the mushroom spores.
Oh.
But then some people say that you shouldn't. It's in the mushroom community, it's a very kind of argued fact. But I think that if you are foraging mushrooms, it's good to try and use a basket or a bag with holes so that you can spread those spores. And then you're really benefiting the species.
I think we got a pretty good look into this, and I think we can continue keeping an eye on your 72 Seasons projects, which is going to last until the end of the year-ish.
It's February.
Until
That's
February.
The beginning of the year.
The calendar year. So until February, we'll get to explore the 72 Seasons with you, and then probably we need to pay more attention and explore by ourselves, and we'll see a little bit more of your foraging adventures.
Yes.
So thank you so much for sharing with us. We'll put all the links in the description so people can follow along. And that's it from us today.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back in the next episode. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.